in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
On the front of Nooganomics.com this morning is a photograph from abcnews-go.com of Mayor Andy Berke and his chief law enforcer, that is to say Fred Fletcher, who is going to be leaving his post in July. And Chief Fletcher has a stern and disapproving scowl on his face. And the mayor's look is somewhat perplexed. For some reason, the photographer at that moment caught an expression which may or may not tell anything about the interior state of either man, but which is nonetheless a kind of an odd photograph. And you can see it at Nooganomics.com, where this morning I give my heads up. The heads up is for a closing window tomorrow, and that is for applications for chief of police. And we are here at Nooga Radio, and we cover local economy in the free market. And you say, well, David, this isn't really an economic topic. This has nothing to do with local economy or the free market. And yet I want to suggest that it really does. It is about a prosperous view of Chattanooga versus a negative, compelling and impelling and coercive view of life in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. And Mayor Berke, you would think, would be a man very much in favor of reform, very much attuned, say, to the Black Lives Matter protest, even though that group has argued many things that are just plain old socialism and plain old abusive of the poor, especially blacks. Right, blacks are those who suffer the most under the current plantation system that we have. You'd think that Mayor Berke would be attuned still to the ideas of reform of the most violent part of the country, and that would be in the police departments around the country. There are about 18,000 of them in municipal jurisdictions, counties, all about. Quite a few of them are private armies that are run by federal agencies. The Department of Education, for example, has a SWAT team. Maybe Mrs. DeVos will send those boys back to class to learn baking or something. And these jurisdictions that have these military organizations, 18,000 in number, are in need of reform. And here now we have, after 3 years, a chief leaving Chattanooga who came with a somewhat favorable view. He was widely hailed on his selection, his hiring, and he has emphasized what I would call the very weak side of reform in the policing field, and that would be community policing. Community policing is not a reform, okay? It is simply a way of trying to reduce the threat by police officers against common people. It is an effort to try to humanize police departments by humanizing their officers, getting their officers to be friends, to be friendly, to have regular beats, to become known in the neighborhood, to become friends and pals of shopkeepers, old men who sit on front porches and watch who passes by certain neighbors' houses, to be able to be affable, to connect, and to be, in a way, sociable residents and workers in particular districts, and to have, in a way, better information, right? To have human, as opposed to technological intelligence. You have human intelligence through the community policing theory, which is about 20 years old, and rose in a kind of counter-reformation against the SWAT system, which grew up from starting in Los Angeles in, I think, the maybe the early 1980s, devised as a kind of militarization of policing in Los Angeles. And so policing has continued to grow extra constitutionally, though with judicial permission, used by everybody who goes into the corporate status, the corporate world through the state. So almost every town that's a corporation has a police department, and full of former military people and men who are really tough. They're tough. They're great on the battlefield, but really not. They're too great. Their greatness is exceedingly valuable, overly valuable in civilian interactions. And there is where we have 1,000 killings a year. You're much more likely to be killed by a police officer in a routine situation than you are by a terrorist. Right? The terrorist threat has been magnified by academicians, by the neoconservatives, by the Republicans, some by the Democrats, and the threat has been magnified in the press, and we are all to believe that we face imminent death at the hands of the Taliban or Al Qaeda or people in their employ, and that we need to have the secrets. We need to have the Stasi and the security forces all around us all the time to make sure we're safe. Right? That is the mantra since 2001, and even before then, we've had that threat. So we all live in fear. Fear is how the state survives. In fact, in a war economy, in a state of warfare, in a state of emergency, that is where the modern state thrives and continues to justify itself. And so policing is part of that apparatus. It rose in great strength in the 1880s, though Chattanooga has had policing since I think about 1849. Chattanooga was an innovator in that shifting the professionalization of the watch function, the peacekeeping and peacemaking function that ordinary citizens used to have it for themselves. They took care of threats. If there was a bank robber, the whole town, the male population of the town would chase after the stolen bags, right, or the bags taken in the heist. It would be a community thing. There would be community security, and everybody looked out for everybody else. People knew each other. There was a communitarian spirit in many towns, many cities across the country, not requiring a professional police force. But we've much changed in the war economy since World War I, and where the national power effectively took over all local economies and drew from every hovel, every town, every farm, men of its own choosing, young men to draft into military service. So since World War I, we've had this national economy, and the effects of nationalization, the effects of empire, have continued on, seemingly growing since the time of Alvin York and his great heroic acts behind the .45 caliber Colt Commander, the 1911 Colt Commander that he had. Every shot of those Germans running toward him mattering, and he fired at the last man first until the first German soldier, almost upon him with his rifle and bayonet, got the last round from Alvin York. Of course, he had a Springfield 30 caliber and just picked off German after German after German until finally the German commander said, "I surrendered." Since that time, we have been increasingly under the modern state. So now we have Andy Berke, and the question we want to ask Andy Berke is about tomorrow. Tomorrow is the deadline for turning in applications. People around the country, men and women who are going to apply to replace Chief Fred Fletcher with his scowl and his very short haircut. The mayor, you would think, would want someone who wants reform and not just a continuation of the community policing paradigm, which, as I say, is a salve in a tube applied to a cancer. Right? That's you get that salve out of your kitchen, out of your bathroom cabinet behind the mirror, and you apply it to an itchy spot, but it's really you're applying to a cancer. That's not going to solve the problem of state violence on behalf of and done by, in the name of law enforcement, in the name of keeping peace, right? In the name of security, in the name of safety, by police departments and even sheriff's departments in our area. We are typical of counties and cities around the country, though we have not had a Castillo slaying quite as violent as the Castillo killing recently, where the police officer was acquitted of manslaughter because he had reason to fear for his personal safety. Right? That was the defense, and the jurors cowed all of them by the state's argument, by the state's rhetoric, believed in his innocence, though an innocent man who did everything right. It was shot down multiple times in his car as his girlfriend filmed the whole thing on Facebook. Well, we need to have police reform, and tomorrow is the deadline for applications. And there is a committee about which we need to mention something. It is a committee initially of 6 individuals. Initially, the committee was stacked in favor of non-reform, right? Stacked in favor of the judicial industrial complex staying as it is. And the one of those 3 left, Judge Christy Sell, the Sessions Court judge, recused herself under the impulsion, if you will, of the Code of Judicial Ethics that bade her to not take part in this, because she was serving a political interest. Policing does serve a political interest, which I've mentioned that a couple of times, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about, particularly as we look at policing as a political function. I won't tell you what I'm thinking about. Okay, I'm not going to tell you which statute I've been reading to analyze further the policing power. It's a tremendous power. 500 people are employed in enforcing statute in Chattanooga, the city limits. Now, it's an unusual situation, as I have pointed out at Nooganomics.com. The website for the man who matters. By the way, Nooganomics.com is the only place you can learn about the deep state as it applies to the state of Tennessee, not just to Washington. The deep state discussion that has risen since the election of Donald Trump has been remarkable, and it's often, and you may have seen the Alex Jones interview last night with Megyn Kelly. She's very she's just a wild card as far as journalism goes, and he is certainly remarkable as well. But Alex Jones has been talking about the deep state for years. It does exist, and it's just been really in the past year come into the public consciousness, and we have Donald Trump to thank for that. Now, the deep state there is a deep state operation in Tennessee, and you won't find out about it from any platform in Chattanooga except Nooganomics. Nooganomics.com, my chief sponsor here on the David Tulis Show. We are here, brought to you by Clay Whitaker, probably the best attorney in Chattanooga at the McCoon Law Firm. We are here at AM 1240 and FM 92.7, and also on HD 95.3 HD4. Now, we're also live on YouTube, and you can look to see in the proper fashion whether my tie matches. I wore this tie and I wore this shirt to church yesterday, and I got out of the house without my wife Jeanette giving it a second look. I think she said, "Well, look, nothing looks amiss," so she didn't stop me as I stooped over her as she's sat on the carpet at the foot of our bed doing her Pilates and watching the morning news programs. She didn't stop me. And you can also watch me on Facebook. Of course, there the image is backwards, but that's okay. That is quite all right. David Tulis here. Glad you have a minute to afford me here at Nooga Radio. The committee of 6 now is 5. One pro-status quo official has gone. Christy Sell, the Sessions judge. So Bill Killian is left, the federal prosecutor, who promised he would impose the rigors of the First Amendment on Christian critics of Islam. That's why he's famous. And then the other is Bill Cox, a county prosecutor before. And then on the other side, you might say in neutral ground or ground that would favor reform, probably the leading candidate who would favor the exercise of grace in the policing function and less the exercise of death. Would be Trinae Jordan. He is a pastor. He's pastor of Mount Canaan Baptist Church. Then there is an artist, Naomi Decline, and then finally there is the CEO of Techtown, which is downtown. It's not a school exactly, but it's a place where you can send your son or daughter to have a computer camp. My son Jacob, who's 14, will be attending the Techtown computer camp that goes for a week. I believe it is next week. The CEO, Chris Ramsey, he is the final party to mention on this committee. Now, what I've suggested to the ones I've been able to make contact, what I've suggested to the ones with whom I've been able to make contact, let me say that correctly, is that we should make note of an important writer and an important organization that works in the direction of saving American lives from the police perspective, and that is Chuck Wexler, who has two reports, one from 2015, one from 2016. The one from 2015, which I just looked at this morning for the first time, is re-engineering training on police use of force, and it makes, again, that's August 2015, and the argument he makes is that police training needs to be completely revised to avoid the needless killing of people who do not deserve the death penalty. Okay, why do we have killings of people who have done nothing worthy of death? Right, nothing. They've not been convicted of a crime worthy of death. That would be murder. That would be rape. Right, that would be sodomy. Those are capital offenses. If you look at the source of equity, buggery is a capital offense. Bestiality in the scriptures is a capital offense. Again, our early colonies here in America had all of those as death penalty offenses. So these are death penalty offenses. Why are people such as, now I'm trying to remember his name, Todd, the plumber at East Ridge? Well, how is it that he faced the death penalty at the hands of Daniel Stevenson, the East Ridge employee? That's right. The East Ridge employee, Daniel Stevenson, executed a citizen of our state and a resident of that city in August last year, and he did it with a military rifle at point blank. With his training, right? His training let him be acquitted because he was trained in the way Chattanooga trains its officers. Daniel Stevenson was cleared of any kind of wrongdoing, even though he executed the man extrajudicially, summarily, and in a statutorily permitted encounter. Right? It was statutorily permitted to kill this very angry plumber who had a metal pipe in his hand, and who, when the bullets struck his chest and one hit him in the back as he went down, who was not raising that weapon in the air. It was by his side when the bullets hit him, but he had done the grave offense of crossing the line. He crossed the line and put his foot from the right-of-way, the grass, the right-of-way, onto the tarmac where the officer stood with his car, right, standing right in front. We are going to solve this problem right now, and if we don't solve this problem right now, well, this man's going to die. And that's all there is to it. And that's exactly what's permitted. That is what is permitted. Why are there no intermediate options? Why? And I raised these questions in my analysis, which you can read only at Nooganomics.com. This analysis was, interestingly enough, spurned by important writers and editors in Chattanooga as inflammatory. But in fact, it is not inflammatory at all. It is in fact the truth of what happened, based all on press reports covered by the Times Free Press, the Chattanooga.com, and television stations that covered this extrajudicial killing. We have extrajudicial killings not just in El Salvador, right? Not just by the Reds in Nicaragua, right? They happen at the hands of city police here in Chattanooga and elsewhere. And we need to have reform in Chattanooga. There needs to be reform. What does this have to do with local economy? Well, there's a local economy thinking that requires it, okay? And that would be, we want to have prosperity. We value every human life. No person should be deprived of life or property without due process of law. Due process of law is not a summary function. It is something where there has to be a jury involved. The people pass judgment on the law and the facts. That would be a trial, right? A trial for a crime. A man who's killed by an officer has not committed a crime. He has done something unwise, no doubt. He has done something unwise given the nature of law against him at this point. The law may be changed at some point by the General Assembly, but only if there's a call for it, only if there's a general sense among the population, among people like you, my listener, who say, we have had enough. We have had enough. And what I want to do is look at why local economy requires that police officers not be killers. Okay, they can't be killers. They really have to be peace officers. They have to be about peace. They have to be about helping people out of their problems. Many people who are killed are having mental problems, and I think primarily of Chris Saxton, who was killed in January of this year in Saudi Daisy by the Tractor Supply, just at the they're on a little ridge that rides down past the off-road tech car and truck repair business, past the pet hospital, and then down to the tractor supply place. Chris Sexton was having mental problems. He had mental problems, and on January 17, he was hit 15 times, at least 15 times. There were 20 bullet wounds. Some of those were exit wounds by sheriff's deputies in Hamilton County serving our elected Sheriff Jim Hammond. These kinds of circumstances, though he aimed a gun at least one officer, should not happen. And I think we have a calling as we consider local economy and the free market. We have a calling to call for respect for human life. We have to have respect for human life. And that is something that if we don't have that, we don't want that, we're not going to get it. If we want that, we're going to be more prosperous long term. There'll be much more grace in local economy. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader,